Designing and constructing buildings takes place over many years, with people collaborating together. In the Brick and Wonder podcast, we have conversations with people who work together to realize a collective vision. We spoke with two people who collaborated on a hotel project in Banff, a town in Alberta, Canada. Aliya, the Vice President of Global Design Strategy at Marriott International, who says it's all about the people, with respect and admiration for the success of others.
I see a beautiful Hilton, like the restoration of the Waldorf Astoria. I am delighted for them because what they have done makes our collective so much better.
And Matt Berman, a founding principal at Workshop APD, an architecture and design studio based in New York City, who says that seeking and feeling energy in the room is intoxicating, and this is what draws him to hospitality design.
That is why I think people go into the hospitality world, because you're in it and you see it and you go, this is a drug. I want this. I need more of this.
I'm Drew Lang.
And I'm Ravi Arps.
This is the Brick and Wonder podcast. Aliya, Matt, welcome to the Brick and Wonder podcast.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I love being here. I also love this space. I have a little bit of space envy. But you have a cool office.
We have a cool office. I think, though, I always have space envy when I go out of the city to someone else's space. Like, you go to LA and somebody's taken over like an old garage and turned it into a cool office or a warehouse. Like, we don't have that luxury in New York City. You are on like the X floor of X building on X corner. And yes, this is super cool. It's got height and things like that. But like, you go to these other spaces and you're like, that's where I want to be.
But you take that for granted a little bit when you're here. I had a similar setup when I worked at Starwood, and you sort of roll with it. You're like, oh, I'm in this space, same thing, all of those attributes. And then you move to a different place. Now, granted, I work in Bethesda and I work in an incredible building. It really is pretty fantastic.
She doesn't have to say that.
No, I don't, but it is actually pretty
cool
fantastic.
Yeah.
And you know me, I never say anything just to say it. But I do have these moments of like, this is so completely different to anything that I naturally gravitate to, things that I love. It's contemporary. It has all of these fantastic sustainable attributes. But I also realized that the things that I just took for granted working in New York, all of these spaces, Varick Street, Fifth Avenue, Soho, that was just inherently part of your everyday. When you don't have it, I think your love and appreciation for it changes, or your relationship to it. A little bit of what I was saying about the everyday easy of New York. That is different, and then you suddenly look back at it and you're like, oh, that was pretty fantastic. People would die to work in these places, and I just kind of did it. Like, no big deal,
New York has an energy that is mysterious, and I'm not sure any of us will figure it out. I actually hope that we do not. But it seems like you guys have known each other for a while. I have two questions that are related. How would you describe what you do, and how did you first meet? Aliya, let's start with you.
So how did you first meet? I really thought about this. I remember, I think the technical, how did you first meet? I hope you have the answer to this because I don't actually. But I had this recollection of first impactful moment where we went to dinner and your husband was with us and Stacy was with us, Stacy Shoemaker. And having dinner with somebody that I had met before, but I couldn't say that I knew him well. And I knew that his husband was going to be there. And we ended up having this fantastic conversation. And it was about design, but it was about travel and it was about life. And your husband was teaching in Brooklyn. And I walked away with just one of those things of like, what a delightful evening. And they're so interesting as a couple. And I had just sort of met you, but now it's like, but now I want to work with him. Because just, your life in Spain and what you had done in the past and, your Owen was young then, your son, and now your son is a teenager. And you know how sometimes the best sort of interactions happen when they're not expected, and it was over dinner. And then fast forward, it was like this met here, met there, met here, met there. Didn't actually work together till later. But to me, that was the first memorable time. So I'm going to qualify that as the first. I couldn't tell you what the first technical time was.
It's never really about the details, is it?
No, it's the feeling. It's always the feeling.
You know, the interesting thing about our first meeting, and again, I don't know if that was the first time or it was before, but we had started our firm, 26 years ago. But we really didn't enter the hospitality space until probably 7, 8, 9 years ago. In fact, it was the Next Gen in Chicago, which I think was the first Next Gen that I had gone to. And I was a complete newbie. Now, we had this history, we had this pedigree, we had this portfolio, but we had never done anything really substantial in the hospitality world. And so you enter into this world, and I was clueless. I didn't know anybody. And you enter into this world that is a family. Like they all, and I say they, now I include myself in it, but back then it was they are a family. They really know each other. They really support each other. And the interesting thing about that family is that they've all migrated from place to place. So maybe you were on the service side, then you went to work for a brand, then you went to work for a developer, then maybe back to a brand. And they all share that pedigree. They all share those relationships. They worked at Starwood. If you look at the Starwood family map, and you look at where that diaspora went, it's crazy, right? Or you look at who worked at Rockwell at any particular time, or any of these kind of storied brands and reputations. What was amazing, because sometimes walking into a family when you're the outsider can be really, really daunting, was how unbelievably accepting they were. And Aliya as well, just embracing, accepting of the newness, accepting of somebody who, willing to educate me and us, right? Willing to sort of be like, yeah, I see something in you. I know you haven't done this before. Come along for the ride. We're gonna show you what you don't know. And it was unbelievably empowering. And I feel like maybe that's where we met for the first time, because I'm sure you were there. Or one of those events.
So many of them.
Yeah. But there was always this sense of like, and then you'd go to the second one, it was like, oh, good to see you again. And it was so welcoming. And I think in a lot of industries where there's so much competition, that family quality, that welcoming quality isn't always there. But in the hospitality world, it really is.
I think that's really well stated. Like, it is by nature all about the people in the hospitality industry, and you pull the people in. And even when you're competing with them for the same jobs, there is still, I believe, so much respect for other people's success, or, oh, you know what? I didn't get that job, but I'm so glad you did, or congratulations, it's beautiful, or, even from where I am, like I work for Marriott, but I see a beautiful Hilton, like the restoration of the Waldorf Astoria. I am delighted for them, because what they have done makes our collective so much better. And I think it goes back to what you're saying of just the people and the welcoming factor, and like your success is my success, and all of us are doing a thing together. And when we all do it together, we're all going to see each other. Of course there's competition and it's friendly, but it is that sort of family, that idea that we're all going to pull together and pull new people in, and some of them are going to love it and stay, and some of them might say, you know what, I tried it, it's not for me. But everybody's welcome. And that is the core of what hospitality is. Everyone should be welcome.
Maybe for the casual listener, would love to get just maybe a brief snippet bio of your path within the industry, and sort of how you arrived to where you are today.
So I went to Pratt, I studied architecture, I did residential design for the longest time, or not really the longest time, a period of time. And somewhere along the way, I felt that this notion of doing a house and walking away from it, but not really being able to shape the interior or the personality or the soul that goes into it was something that was a little hard for me as an individual. And in my head, I thought, you know what? Industrial design feels like a really good way to go that route. So I was living in Pakistan. I'd gone back to Pakistan, which is where I'm originally from, after my architectural degree. And I was like, I'm going to go back to New York. I'm going to go to Pratt. I'm going to study industrial design. And I laugh at myself now because I'm like, all these steps, all these leaps, these jumps to get to this thing. And I signed up in theory for furniture and product design and made my way into inadvertently this thing called brand strategy and furniture. And that sort of morphed into something that's a little bit closer to what I do today. I was working at Pentagram in their exhibit design group, and they are exceptional in everything that they do. But I had this realization, like, that also was not for me. There was a level of finesse and particularity around exhibit design that I admired, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I was in this moment of like, I don't know about this. Like, what do I do? I need to find a job. I need to find something that clicks. And I'm not kidding. I was in a bar after class, and my friend's boyfriend was like, well, I work for a hotel company and I need someone to come and help me knock out a bunch of projects. Why don't you come work with us for a couple of months and I'll help you find a job? And I get a phone call the next day and they're like, hi, I believe you're joining us. It was Starwood Hotels and Resorts. And the 3 months became 13 years. And so no one believes me when but it was literally that. And I was welcomed. And there was so much I didn't know, like room standards or hospitality standards or, just operational standards. I remember Brad Wilson, who was leading brand operations for W Hotels at the time. He's now with Ace Hotels. And he was so infinitely patient with me and all of these things that he taught me. And it was like, again, that idea of like, well, she doesn't really know what she's doing here, but he clearly saw something or felt something that he took the time to teach. And it sort of went from, this is going to be a 3-month something, to, I love this and I'm learning something and they're welcoming me and they're challenging me and they're pushing me to grow. And now I'm like, there really isn't anything aside from hospitality design out there, which is so insane for me to say. But, that's how I feel.
There's this kind of dynamic of luck at play here. But the thing that's really clear is that you wouldn't have come into that luck if you hadn't had an openness to it, right? And you've used the words delightful and unexpected in the way that you're talking about things. It seems like those are kind of important and operative words for you, and the way that you live your life and the way that you're open to things. I get the sense, Matt, that you're the same way, right? You mentioned you haven't always done hospitality work. You had some luck meeting people like Aliya. I'm sure you had some other luck along the way too. Tell us a little bit about your journey in this notion of luck for you.
I think luck it's really an interesting word. I think you do get lucky, but you have to put yourself in the position to get lucky.
Correct.
So it's a two-way street, right? It doesn't just happen. If you sit on your ass, nothing's going to happen. You've got to put yourself out there. But once you put yourself out there, where it takes you is a combination of where you want to go and where you let yourself be taken, right? And that's fun. That unexpected part of the journey is really kind of, I think, frankly, what we love about design and what we love about the profession, what we love about hospitality, is that you are guiding the journey with a client, but you're also letting yourself be guided and informed. And so, for us, my path was a little bit different. When I was in grad school, actually here in the city, I really thought I was going into architectural journalism. That was sort of my path, and that's what I had done for a while. I had interned at some of the, storied publications of the Architecture magazine back in the day, in DC. In fact, I spent a summer in DC working for Architecture magazine, and I really liked that. I really liked kind of talking about architecture, thinking about it, thinking about sort of the urban condition and where things were going to go. And then I actually spent some time working on a very sort of avant-garde publication at the end of the last, I guess, millennia, with Cynthia Davidson and Peter Eisenman. It was a publication called Any. It was a very, very thought-provoking publication that was really studying architecture at the end of the millennia. It was a think tank project from 1990 to 2000, and they would bring together a group of the architects from around the world and a group of really important locals from various places that we would go. So, there was a conference in Ankara, Turkey. There was a conference in Buenos Aires. There was a conference in Seoul, Berlin. And they would sort of mix these kind of very large names, people like Zaha Hadid, Daniel Libeskind, Peter Eisenman, Bernard Schumi, on and on and on, Rem Koolhaas, with some of the great thinkers from these local environments to talk about the implications of kind of globalization, this sort of, architecture in the age of digitalization and things that were happening globally with those effects in the local community. What did that mean for the local community from a social point of view, from an architectural point of view, from an economic point of view, and so on and so forth. And so for me, I think I was 23 or 24 at the time. I was surrounded by these names, these greats, right? And I was the lackey, right? I was the lackey. Like I tell people all the time, in The Devil Wears Prada, when she throws her coat on Anne Hathaway, that Zaha Hadid did that to me, right? We were going into an event and I was sort of standing there and she took off her large coat and just threw it at me. And I was like, okay, I guess that's why I'm here. But I say that jokingly, but the reality was I was surrounded by these people who were deep thinkers, people who really loved this profession, loved this idea of design, really thought that design and architecture and all these things are a protagonist in our life. They are not something that we sort of are blind to. They're not something we can take for granted. These are things that are really part of what make living great and possible and fun and all these things. That architecture has the ability to affect your mood. Architecture has the ability to change cities, to all of these things. And so at that point in my career, and that's probably a very long-winded way of saying, that was where my head was. My head was in this incredibly robust thinking space, and thinking about how you change the world through good design. And I was working at this publication, and I absolutely loved it. But what I kind of also realized was that I was having this urge to get my hands dirty. I was having this, I couldn't just write about it anymore, and I was a good editor. I don't know that I was the best editor, and I was a good writer. I don't know I was the best writer. And when you're surrounded by some of these people who are so talented, I think probably played on a lot of my insecurities. And I thought, I'm going to give actual practice a shot, because I really feel like in order to understand this, I need to do it. And so really kind of right out of school, one of my best friends from college and a guy named Andrew Kotchin, decided to start a firm. We really didn't have much experience. He had a few projects that he was working on. I had a project here in the city that I was working on. We're not trust fund kids, so it wasn't like we could just sort of ring the cash. We had to make it work. We had a couple projects. Those projects turned into more projects. It was a lot of networking, a lot of talking to friends. We joke all the time that our first couple clients came through his sister because she had more connections than we did. And, so she would refer people to us and we would do everything we needed to do to land the project. And then fast forward, that was in the called the single family residential world. That was a lot of apartments in New York. Andrew, my partner, got his start on Nantucket, so we were doing homes on Nantucket. Not bad places to work, right? Great places to work. And used those communities to start to build more and more into the residential world. And then I think as we grew, we started to went from single family to multifamily residential and started doing those projects. And now we understood scale a little bit more. And we started to get then into hospitality. And I think for a lot of the reasons that Aliya was just talking about, there is a there's a public quality to hospitality that you don't get in the private residential world. When you walk into a hotel or a restaurant, especially when it's full and it comes to life and you see the energy in the room and you feel it and you see people having conversations or laughing in a corner or, you know, who knows what, there's an energy there that really does bring the space to life, where it's no longer just bricks and sticks. It's now an ambiance. It's an environment. It has a soul. And that is intoxicating, right? That is why I think people go into the hospitality world, because you're in it and you see it and you go, this is a drug. I want this. I need more of this, right? And so I think for us, that, I don't know where maybe my first opportunity was, but it was just, I think we had done a small restaurant here for a client who had a cousin and, you know, that kind of thing. And then that led to this like, ooh, this is fun. This is like, you kind of feel alive in those moments.
This podcast is sponsored by Madera, offering an integrated collection of high-quality wood products. They provide seamless wood design that simplifies wood finish specification. My architecture firm has worked with Madera on several projects where they provided wood material for flooring, doors, and cabinetry. Their product line and approach created an integrated result and made the process easier, not just for my team, but also for the project contractors and mill workers. I personally recommend Madera. You can learn more about them at maderasurfaces.com.
What aspect of your background or experience do you think informs your perspective on hospitality and what you do in that world that makes it unique?
It's an interesting question. I definitely think it's informed a lot by our residential work. I mean, we have spent 26 years talking to real people about how they live in their real lives. And when I say real lives, it's not just about the pretty picture that you see in the magazine. It's about maybe designing an incredible home for someone and who have incredibly deep pockets and they want a beautiful space, but maybe they also have geriatric dogs that live with them, that sleep in bed with them, right? That are just as important to their family as their kids, as anyone else. Well, that's a reality. These dogs have problems. They're old. Like you can't pretend they don't exist. And I think a lot of our work comes out of this reality of living, that people have kids. Kids are going to jump on the furniture. Some father is going to spill a glass of red wine. Like there's a life that has to happen inside of these places. So it's not just about perfection. It's about this balance between reality and perfection.
And that's why they felt like the absolute perfect partner for our project, because, you know, we were looking at a unique situation, and it was unique by way of the fact that it was an adaptive reuse. So that in and of itself was fascinating. But then we're applying what we call a prototypical brand on top of it. And, you know,
Can you describe what that means a bit?
a prototypical brand is something that theoretically I could come to you and I could say, look, here are your 1,000 drawings and your 1,000 specs. You now have all the information you need to go and build a Moxy hotel, soup to nuts. But the reality was that I knew, because this motor lodge that was in fact being adapted to a Moxy was already setting the table a little bit differently. So how do you take something that's prototypical, convert it, or sort of marry it with this adaptive reuse? There's also this third component. The brand was launching itself. And, you know, you're trying to tell this story that is appealing genuinely, not out of, you know, a cliche, that could resonate with what is cool in Banff, not only in summer, but also in winter. You wanted to actually have the ability to get into culture, and not topical, but actually, you know, research perhaps over time, history, style, trend. And to me, it was like, I knew that Matt and his team could do all of that, but then you also want this layer that comes through in residential design. And many times when you do look at hospitality, less so today, but there's this mass production quality that still exists. And particularly when you look at prototypical brands, it's actually okay to be mass produced, right? We're looking to crank these things out, cost to build, repetition, all of that are actually attributes that people look for. And if this was a new build, something in the middle of nowhere with no sort of architectural precedence or anything, fine. But I knew that this building was going to be special, the destination was special. So there were all of these sort of philosophical buckets in my head that had to come together. And so, you're starting to think like, okay, who is an interesting, unique voice who can start to tie all these threads together? And then it was like, who is a fresh voice who we've never worked with? How do you start to look at that? And that was why it made sense. And I think, as you were talking today, and it's so interesting, like, I know you and I know so many parts of you, but now I'm like, oh, architectural journalism, that makes sense, right?
In what way?
Because the ability to sort of dig deep and think deeply and really sort of get into the nuance of, for the lack of better word, a story, I think that is something that is so important, because then that manifests itself in the built design. Eventually, if you have the ability, the awareness, the intellectual sophistication to do it. And now I'm like, oh, that tracks. That also explains your website, because I've always thought that your website is quite layered and, you can be enamored by beautiful photos and move on, or you can actually stop and read what there is to read and look at the placements and understand like there's more going on here than just a series of photos. And so I learned something new today.
It's interesting, right? You clearly had this sense about this project, the Moxy in Banff, that you should work with someone new. Why is that, right? What was going on that brought you to that place?
Because I think the fact that the site and this motor chalet was being converted was so interesting and novel and not something that we'd done before. I knew that it had to be a different approach. And in order to do that, sometimes you just, it's like you need a different medium. If you're always drawing in pencil, maybe you need, the paintbrush with a handle that is much longer than what you're comfortable with. And I mean, that's an exaggerated example, but I thought that, this was the opportunity, and I'd been wanting to partner with him on something. And, you have that moment where you go for the long walk and you start to think, and you're looking at portfolios and you're looking at projects, and, you're formulating a short list. And I was like, this is the one. This felt like the right one.
What was your vetting process like?
I think for any time, it's a couple of things. It's the historic portfolio, the range of projects, the fact that it wasn't just a hospitality portfolio, but the fact that it was residential, the fact that there was multifamily. So it's like, okay, they understand the fact that there's, product SKUs and there's this idea of multiplication, the fact that there was this understanding of big design, but then being able to bring it down to small detail. So it was a lot of that type of looking. Then, you always ask after the firm and people who've worked with them. And, you sort of build a picture in your head before you actually reach out. And then, we talked, and then the owner ultimately makes the final choice. But for me, it was like, how do I start to at least narrow the pool to a point where I'm like, I feel good. And then they went and brought it home. And it was really quite lovely, fast forward when the hotel was done, to be able to go and walk it together. And not only walk it together, but then to also walk it with the owner. And, this is an individual who's part of a business that is a family business, and they had more traditional hospitality product. And when I say traditional to the Banff area, more in the sort of lodge sort of nomenclature. So this was the first time they had done this branded product. But he seemed happy and he seemed excited. And you could see that he had maybe gone in thinking he was going to do one thing. And along the way, he got caught up with the excitement and the opportunity and where he could push. And so whether it was the art commissions or some of the found pieces that he sort of layered in to push the narrative a little bit further, like that's when the magic happens. And that's the power of a design firm, but a good owner who
Tell
understands
us
the
more
value.
about that dynamic. The dynamic
I
between.
feel like you should get
I was
into
going to
that.
say,
Yeah.
it is a.
You
it
know
is-
which vignette I'm talking about,
yeah,
right?
no,
The
it's-
bookshelf.
It's a three-legged stool, right? In the hospitality world, you have actually probably more than that, but you've obviously got the brand, you've got ownership, and then you've got the architect and designer, and all three have to be performing, right? You can have an incredible brand, an incredible designer, and an owner that is just kind of phoning it in and not paying attention, and it shows because you just can't get it across the finish line. But when you have an owner who is interested, invested, passionate, wants to get it there, doesn't necessarily mean they're just opening up their wallet by any means. There are always questions about, guys, I love this idea, but this is what we can afford. How can we get there? Right? And those are the best conversations. When an owner calls you up and is like, I want you to solve this because you're the designer. We want you guys to figure this out. This is where it's coming in. We love what this is about. We love what this is doing, but we can't afford this, right? Or we can't buy this. We can't, whatever it is, the material's not available, whatever it is. That's when the problem solving side of our business kicks in, right? I mean, that's ultimately what we are. We're problem solvers through design, right? And we're solving whether it's a programmatic problem or a stylistic problem or whatever, or financial problem. But when there is that trust and there is that investment and that enthusiasm, that's our love language, right? That is what gets us going. When an owner shows you that respect, when an owner shows you that encouragement, and you know that they're in it with you also, you will go to the ends of the earth for them. You really will, because that is what's important to us. Obviously we have to make money and all these things, but I think that's kind of, it's funny, that's the miss I think that the outside world has with architects and designers, is that anyone who went to architecture school is smart enough to have gotten an MBA, right? They could go work on Wall Street. They could go work anybody who went to that, like, it's intense. You spent countless hours, overnights in the studio. You're criticized beyond belief. Your ego is shot to shit. I mean, you're like, that is the design world is really about asking you to question everything about what you're doing, to understand these complicated relationships, put them back together in a resolved way. Like, we could easily go get an MBA and probably make a lot more money. But that's not our love language. That's not what drives us. What drives us are these environments that we get to create. What drives us is the way that things come together. It's the relationships between components, between things, between people, between, all the complexities of a project. When an owner understands that and supports that, it's magical.
Matt, how do you vet a client and how do you vet a partner? Because it seems like trust and relationship is extremely important to you, and it seems like what you're saying is the difference between a project working out or not. So it is mission critical. But we hear a lot about how an owner vets their architect. We don't hear much about how an architect vets the client, because I imagine in a business as large as yours, with as much visibility as yours has, you get lots of business. Not all of it, at this point, will be good business. So tell us about that process.
That is a great question, and we talk about this a lot. We do. We talk about this a lot in the office. We are fortunate to have a lot of people, have our phone ringing and have people coming to us. Just right off the bat, we try to be upfront and clear and honest about everything, right? No project is a cakewalk, right? Everything's going to have its ups and downs. We call them peaks and valleys, and they happen in different places every time. Whatever the peak and valley was for last project is not going to carry over to this project. So you can take your learnings forward, But how you triage these moments and when they happen are always going to be different. So we start off just by aligning expectations. When we have an inbound call or when somebody asks us about anything, we just want to know what are their expectations? What are they looking to get out of it? What are they looking to get out of it aesthetically? What are they looking to get out of it programmatically? What are they looking to, what do they have to contribute financially, time, stuff like that. So let's just start there. Plenty of people don't make it past that sort of initial cut just because the expectations don't align. Hey, it's, we're in October right now and somebody calls and says, I want to redo my apartment and I need it done before Memorial Day. It's just like, we don't have that magic wand. Either, maybe somebody else can, maybe somebody else is incredibly nimble and can jump right on it. That's just not how we work. So we'll just be honest. That's not how we work. And that's probably not going to happen. Financial picture, same thing. We know what it costs to execute our projects. And that's not just saying our projects are X dollar our value, but when we look at our projects and we cast our work out to the street to have multiple contractors bid on it, those bids come back usually between X and Y, right? So when you talk about a cost per square foot, which is a huge generalization, but it's a starting point, we can speak to that starting point. Now, obviously, you can trend that up, you can trend it down. There's a lot of ways to split that up. But in general, you're going to fall in that area. So if somebody says, this is my number, and I can't exceed that, we may also simply say that's not the right fit for us. And we don't want to lead you on. We're going to tell you what we know of our place in our industry and our competitors and things like that. It's not to say it can't be done another way. We're just not the right fit for that. Then it gets into sort of expectations about aesthetics, right? And we'll talk to people about what it is they're looking for. We know what we do and where we can flex. We exist in this kind of transitional modern world. We can flex into things that have a slightly more historical character. We can flex into an area that has a slightly more modern language, but we're probably not going to go into the super traditional, and we're probably not going to go into like the crisp, machinic, lifeless modern world. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, right? Like, it's just, that's not our sweet spot. So part of it is just understanding that. And as you're talking to somebody, you are listening a lot and hearing what kind of red flags they have. Sometimes people are very open to taking this and really want to listen and want to hear what our experiences are. Sometimes they want to tell you what they know. Right? And that's fine. Some people are well educated. Some people just want to hear themselves talk, But we're always trying to sort of listen to see sort of what the fit is. Ultimately, if we think there's a really good design opportunity, the budget's there, and the time expectations are reasonable, we're excited about it. Now, that doesn't mean that every client is a great client. I think what makes a great client often has to do with their willingness to be open, their willingness to be honest about what they want, their willingness to listen, their willingness to provide feedback. It is a two-way street. We do spend a lot of time trying to get into someone's head and trying to understand who they are. But if they can't express what they like, if they can't express what they want, or if they're, sometimes you'll get people who are whatever they saw the last time they were at their friend's apartment, their friend's house, is what they want now. And that could be totally different than what they saw last week. And so you end up a little bit on a wild goose chase, and that's not really that helpful either. But in general, when you have an open, honest dialogue with a client, when they can be honest with you, you can be honest with them, you can both be vulnerable together. I don't know the answers to everything. They don't need to know the answers to everything, but they just need to admit it. I don't know. I need to help work through this. Then it's a good, that's when you have a good process.
What did you learn about each other during that process that was unexpected?
I don't know that I learned anything that I hadn't expected or anticipated. I think I was delighted that I was able to say I told you so to a couple of other people, that was a joy. Like when you sort of say like, this is a guess and I think it's going to be like this, and then it exceeded every expectation. And now, of course, now I'm like, well, we've talked recently about the potential of something else. And again, I'm not the one who makes the final decision, but I'm like, they certainly, from where I sit, position themselves in a range of projects, but I could see them pushing into other interesting hospitality juxtapositions and things where they have range. And it comes back to, if you are able to take narratives and really draw from the context of site authentically and really pull out true compelling storylines that are not pastiche and cliche, and then truly apply the formality and the rigor of design to that, really interesting things happen. And I think that's like the fun part of it.
That is 100% the fun part. The storytelling.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the story of this particular project, maybe specifically, and then take it to the abstract?
So starting just with storytelling, you don't necessarily know where that kernel is going to come from, right? Part of it is that exploration and being open to seeing things through fresh eyes. And what you'll hear a lot in the design world is, this question of like, do I hire somebody local who knows this area, or do I hire somebody from the outside? Good question. Sometimes there's a reason to do one or the other. But I will always say bringing somebody in from the outside is great because you're getting fresh eyes. And so when we went to Banff, I'd never been there before. I'm a skier and snowboarder and love that kind of mountain world, but I'd never been to Banff, so I was super excited to go there. And it is everything you can imagine, right? You're surrounded by mountains and it's just picturesque. It's just layer on layer and layer of pictures and lakes, and it's stunning. But when you go to a place with fresh eyes, you see things that locals don't see or have stopped seeing, right? And that's really true of anywhere we go. You go there and you're like, oh, that's cool. And you're able to just in some ways, be a kid again, right? You're able to just sort of take it all in with this exuberance and this, enthusiasm about what you're seeing. And you're able to ask questions. What does that mean? What does that mean? Why do I see a lot of that here? What's going on here? And part of that is good because you can ask the honest questions. Nobody's gonna shame you for not knowing because you've never been there before. And when you go to a place like Banff, what you really see is pretty obvious aesthetically. 97% of everything built there is what I call Lincoln log architecture, right? It's Rocky Mountain, Canadian Rocky Mountain, heavy timber, sort of locked together. There's going to be like a grizzly bear in the lobby. And it's exactly that, right? It's all wood. It's wood on wood on wood. And that's fine. That's the vibe, right? And that's what makes these places great is you go there and they are authentic. The neat thing about this particular building, like Aliya said, was it's adaptive reuse. It's one of the 3, oddly, mid-century modern buildings in Banff. And why there are 3, who knows? But like it looks like a high school from the mid-1960s, late 1960s, right? It's like very horizontal, 2 stone-clad stair towers, lots of glass ribbon bands. I mean, it's kind of this iconic weird thing in the middle of this other place. And so the storytelling starts there, right? Where it's adaptive reuse. So we're inheriting this thing. It's not ground up. It has its own history, its own life. The building, so first of all, you're playing into a time period, which is, called the 1960s. You're playing into a history of the building. The building was called the Voyager, and it was a motor lodge. And the Voyager, which was lovingly called the Voy, was where people who grew up in Banff and Calgary, that's where back in the day they had their prom, they had their first kiss, they had their first drink. Like everyone had a story about the Voy, right? And including the owners whose family was from Calgary and kind of knew the area really well and had grown up there. So the Voy had a name, right? Had a story. So you take this place, you take this building in this time period, you combine it with Banff, this place also that is magical. And then the brand, the Moxy brand, it's a cheeky, sexy, fun, doesn't take itself too seriously, very comfortable, but whimsical, kind of turns things on its head a little bit. Those are your ingredients. You take those ingredients, you're kind of putting them into a bouillabaisse, and now you've got this interesting series of things happening. And that's, for us, it was this story. We started talking this, almost it was like a Thelma and Louise. We were like, what if, you had these people that were going on a road trip, and, they're in a convertible, and the top's down, and the scarf is blowing, and the hair is flying, and they're in this but they've got this there's a cheeky sexiness, and they end up at this place, and you just start riffing, right? And that is ultimately where these stories come from. And I think the most successful projects are the ones that have a really clear story. I think we've all been to projects where you walk into, let's even in the hotel world, you walk into the lobby, the entry, and it's one vibe. Then you go to the rooms or the hallways, and it's another vibe. Then you go to the restaurants, another. And it's fine to have somewhat opposing or somewhat dissimilar vibes, but if it's too disjointed, it's weird. It's just uncomfortable, and it feels like one was done 10 years ago, one was done 3 weeks ago, and it doesn't ever feel cohesive. But when you walk into a space that does feel cohesive, there's an energy to it that's incredible. And so I think that's, for us, what we were most excited about was that not only did the story come through, but what we were talking about before, the ownership and everybody else really supported that. And brand, Ali was talking about the prototype. The neat thing about the Moxy brand, and frankly, the neat thing about Marriott and the way they think about their brands, is very little is truly locked in stone, right? I think they are very much looking to think about, how do we stay true to this brand? How do we stay true to the soul of the brand, but give it the ability to flex, give it the ability to adapt to a location, to a population, to a sensibility in a way that makes sense, because that's why you go. If it doesn't make sense, you're going to go there and it's just going to feel weird. So I think there was a tremendous amount of support from the brand. Even when we were going through our exercises, there was always a check-in of like, is this okay? Is this acceptable? Are we able to do it? And there was definitely like an enthusiasm about what we were doing. And every once in a while I'd be like, yeah, no, I wouldn't do that. That's too much, or things like that. But it was it was just a very supportive process.
What about the gnarly challenges on the project that had to be overcome, or was it just smooth sailing from the beginning?
There were a lot of challenges. There were a lot of challenges dealing with the adaptive reuse of the building. There were a lot of challenges dealing with procurement. We were, for many reasons, trying to go through a lot of procurement in Canada versus procurement in the US. That's sort of part and parcel to, I think, any project. Nothing.
And you did new things, right? Because like some of your room configurations were different. Also,
not prototypical at all.
So like it wasn't even like you're replicating something that has been done before. Like what you guys did with like those, I don't even know what they were called, the multi-bunk with the big,
family bunk rooms.
Like they made these things out of nowhere, but it all takes time, right? You got to test it out. You got to check the flow, the light. They had sunroofs. Like there was some great experimentation that happened, but I mean, we know design takes time. And
there was an openness on the part of the owner to engaging that experimentation. That's so cool.
1,000%.
That's really cool.
But I think it was also, you alluded to this earlier, like it is design, but it's business strategy, right? All of these experiments that he did, whether they were alternate room configurations, there's a business upside, additional revenue, larger groups, interlocking rooms. I mean, I now look at that project and I'm like, look, it goes back to, yes, it's not what we typically do for Moxy, but in that location, for that audience, for that market type, it is brilliant. And it makes complete sense how you solve business problems. And that's sort of also part of the thread, right? It may not make sense in New York City. It would definitely not make sense in New York City. But for where you were, it was dead on, and absolutely the need.
It's interesting. We talk a lot in our office about the value of design, right? And I think that architects and designers think through that lens. Design has value, right? And we sort of are constantly pounding our chest. Design has value. Why don't you believe in the value of design? When you talk to the outside world and you're talking to people that are funding all of this, that sounds super woke and super woo. Oh, yeah, of course, design has value. What we've started to do is quantify that. is actually show that no, we're talking not just design has value in the kind of emotional, spiritual way. We're talking about design has value in the economic way. So what we've started to do is a number of things. We've been looking at, for example, on our single family residential side, we've been looking at the sales of those projects, the ones that turn over, in comparison to the current market value of what's going on in that particular area. And we've been able to show that our projects, by and large, trade at a much, much higher value. Right? So what we're saying to the owner is, yes, you're investing in us. Yes, you're paying us a premium. Yes, we're going to push you on design. But at the end of the day, we are putting money back in your pocket. So there is an ROI, just like if you were to invest in the stock market, just like if you were to invest in a tech company or something like that. On the hospitality side, it's the same thing. When those projects, there are two things we can evaluate. We can evaluate the ADR, which is the average daily rate, or things like RevPAR, which is the way that revenue is evaluated in the hospitality world. We can look at what that, when we talk about the Moxy Banff, we can talk about what their rate was prior to the work, prior to the renovation, right? When it was the Voyager. And again, old school motor lodge. And then what we did now, and you can look at that jump, right? Not only do you look at the jump in occupancy, but you look at the jump in what they're getting for their average daily rate. And the second thing we can do is look at where those hotels that we've designed trade. So we did the one hotel in Nashville for SH Group. And that project was then sold to Host Hotels, who operate a lot of hotels. Well, when you look at what that traded for in a cost per key, it traded at a premium, right? So that then tells me that that product in that market, which is arguably a fairly saturated market, right? Nashville has a lot going on. That product still traded above what that sort of conventional market thinking is, and made our client money. Now, we're part of that. Obviously, the timing was right. Obviously, there's a lot else going into it, but it does get to this idea that no, design has real monetary value that can be quantified, that isn't just this emotional attachment or some,
What are you
bohemian
doing
spirit.
with that data, right? That's really interesting and compelling. Are you still figuring that out? What to do with the data?
It's a good question. First of all, we're working through it. We've been working on it now for probably 6 months or so to really understand it and really parse it down, because we have to look at the acquisition numbers, we have to look at the construction numbers, and then ultimately you have to look at what the sale number is and then look at that margin, right? So it's not an easy exercise, but it is telling a really good story. So what we're trying to do is now develop that into a white paper that is specifically talking about the value of design in relation to a return on investment. And to me, that's what I like about it is it's like you now have you can hang your hat on something, right? It's not just us talking about a love of design, but it's tangible.
So part of the eye is the design cost. The other part of the eye is the construction cost. And we've all seen what's happened with construction costs since COVID. We all have seen and observed what has been going on in the industry with regard to labor costs for a long time, labor scarcity, insurance, all of these things which are to some degree outside of all of our control. You have the mandate to produce the design. You have the mandate to hold the vision and to hold the designers accountable. And then there's this construction element. For clarity, I'm a builder. I'm curious how both of you think about the execution end of this, I guess the fourth leg of the stool, because when you're innovating, that seems like R&D, that seems like experimentation, that seems like who do you select to be your vendor partner or your fabrication partner or your construction partner in all of this? Do they share your values? How do you navigate the execution of your design in order for you to better achieve the ROIs that you're trying to achieve for yourselves and for your clients?
So for us, it's a little bit different in that, going back to what is a prototype, for all the prototypes that we put out, we have almost 40 brands, and a lot of them do have prototypes. we work with partners to develop product. So this is a chair, this is a table, it is bespoke or custom to a specific brand. We'll develop them with different makers, with different vendors. Some of them are domestic, some of them are international. And the idea is that not only are we co-creating bespoke product that is unique to a brand, but we are also now doing it as a response to support designers, owners, people who are developing hotels to say, we're asking you to build our hotels. We're also going to offer you product that meets our criteria, our standards. And because we have done it, we have negotiated price points. We are also able to partner with these particular resources and give them some sense of pipeline volume, what is a new build, how many renovations, just sort of attempt to manage scale. And I say attempt because, of course, there's always things that change. Look at where we are today, and just with, the state of imports and tariffs and things like that, that is an evolving conversation. But the idea is that how can we actually develop product that looks and feels a certain way so that what we do for Moxy is clearly differentiated from what we do for, say, Residence Inn and, say, Courtyard Hotels and, say, Westin, so that brand differentiation exists from a physical materiality perspective, from an accessibility and cost perspective, and put it out there. Now, an owner might decide to build a hotel and say, you know what, I'm working with Matt Berman and Workshop APD, and they're incredibly talented, and we're going to follow your DNA and your design foundation, but we don't need to purchase your package. We're going to go the bespoke route, and that's totally fine and very acceptable, and it's done all the time. And there might be some who are like, you know what, I need to crank this out quickly. I'm on a tight budget, and I'd like to leverage parts of your prototype, and I'd like to, so there's many different permutations. But the idea is that we have a base offering that exists. Some design firms like to use all of it. Some use some of it. Some develop, and then where they have to fill in gaps or things they know they can pull from. Many of them look at it so they can understand the minimum expectation, and then they are inspired by that. So it really is like, how do you, from an execution standpoint, at least start to establish a little bit of a framework that you can either benefit from or be informed by?
Got it.
I think what Aliya is talking about is the way that the brand sets up the opportunities for implementation. But regarding actual implementation, the reality is right now it's tough.
Oh, yeah.
It's really fucking tough. You're talking about all the things. You're talking about disruption of the supply pipeline. You're talking about disruption of the labor pipeline. You're talking about current instability in tariff markets and in the conventional locations where a lot of product would get made now has to shift to other places, which means figuring out a whole new ecosystem. So it's really, really complicated. And, I think all of that uncertainty leads to things slowing down, right? Ultimately, it leads to owners and developers either pushing pause because they can't make heads or tails of it and they don't want to put themselves at risk, or just going very slowly to make sure that as they take every step is a very clearly calculated step because there's just so much unknown.
This podcast is sponsored by Reilly Architectural Windows and Doors. I've personally worked with Reilly on several projects, and they've become a go-to partner for me and my architectural firm. Their team is warm, responsive, and technically outstanding, from the ownership to the project managers and through to the fabrication team. They make custom hardwood and metal windows and doors with true artisan-level craft at their shop in Calverton, New York. And they handle everything from design support to installation and maintenance across the United States. I actively seek out new opportunities to collaborate with Reilly and look forward to working with their team on many future projects to come. Are there particular execution partners who you've found to be helpful in this regard, be it a construction group or an owner representative, people who are particularly effective at helping you guys shepherd projects from design concept to reality?
Yeah. I mean, there are so many people that go into these, like it is, and I say to the single family clients, and you can imagine how much it multiplies when you're talking about larger projects. When you think about the number of people, the number of hands that touch any project, it's not just the design team. It's not just the people on site. It's the people that are also shipping all the material to site. So it's all the truckers and shippers and freight people. Then it's all the people in the factories making the products, right? It's in the tens of thousands of people that touch every single project, right? It's daunting. And this gets to the peaks and valleys, but all it takes is one of those things to go sideways, right? A truck, a shipment that gets lost at sea, a factory that burns down, God forbid, but it's happened. Something falls off a truck. Who knows? Things like, a warehouse floods, like shit happens. And it's just, you never know where it's coming from, and it happens. So at the end of the day, it's really about a team that always, one, keeps their eye on the prize. I think any team that sort of devolves into finger pointing, like no, it doesn't ever work. It doesn't get anywhere. You feel good for the 30 seconds that you pointed the finger. As soon as you're done, you're like, shit, what do I do now? So it's like, how do you come together as a team? How do you solve problems? How do you make sure that, yes, this was a curveball that threw at us. What are we going to do about it? How do we move on? Those are where we find the most effective, the most effective sort of approaches, because it's an owner who has an open mind and may have to spend a little bit more, but isn't counting the pennies, understands that, like, no, we have to keep this moving forward. It's a contractor that understands that they may need to reach out to different people or different subs or mobilize things a different way or swap things or priors, but that is open to the conversation. It's designers who aren't so, and I say this about ourselves, but so tied to every line they drew that they understand sometimes changes need to get made, and sometimes you need to be flexible, and sometimes if you have one thing that's going to make or break your design, well then, you know what? It wasn't such a good design. Like, there has to be a little bit more give in that. And if something sort of stays true to the spirit of it, then you just keep going forward. But it's everybody come together constantly to make sure that you're staying on track.
Because if it can go wrong, it will go wrong. Like, shit happens all the time.
All the time.
Like, I say this often. Like, I think a purchasing agent has the most stressful job in a hotel project, because it's all of those scenarios that you mapped out. Something going out of business, something flooding, a freight being held at one location, the fabric that has to go on the thing that goes on the other thing that is required for this last thing to be released in order for a room installation to start. And without that first thing and suddenly you're standing there reorganizing the whole thing on the back of a napkin because you have to keep things moving. Happens all the time.
And I think that part, in some ways, the older you get, the more you know it's going to happen.
Correct.
You just don't know when.
Correct.
You just don't know when. And I think in some ways that's part of the fluid, that's part of the fun. It is kind of fun to be constantly problem solving, and it's part of the energy. But it's also why you work and trust really talented people. And it's fun working with really smart people and really talented people who are in their areas, craft, whatever it is. When you can go to whatever it is, maybe it's a plumbing issue, maybe it's an upholstery issue, maybe it's a mechanical issue. Like, how do we solve this? I'm not the expert here. I'm just going to ask the question, right? But how do we solve this? And who do we need to bring in to figure it out?
Knowing that you aren't the smartest person in the room. Always. You said something early on when we started talking that sort of stayed with me, is this idea of that, you have to be open. And I think the open isn't always for the joy. It's also the knowing that when it goes south, like, sometimes you have to sit back and listen and let the people who know what they're doing actually do what they're doing. And it's like, know when you need to step away. And I think a sort of tangential thing to that is also identifying in the course of that, what are the things you don't like? And how do you sort of move away from that in your practice, in your philosophy, in how you approach work, the types of work you do? It is this sort of lifelong learning.
Well, what are some of the things for you?
I think like going back to like where this conversation started in many ways, like I didn't want to do residential work. I have immense respect for anybody who can do it. I find they are infinitely patient. I think the fact that they can see something through like that, the fact that they can walk away from doing a residential house and not do, but that was my relationship to what it is. And I think we sometimes, or certainly when you're younger, you feel like, oh my God, I went to school for this. How do I walk away from this? And now I'm like, you know what? We are supposed to reinvent ourselves consistently. Do it with a little bit of intellect and knowledge and learning, and learn from your mistakes, and don't make the same mistake twice, and accept when there's a bigger, better voice that is going to teach you something new, and draw from that and go on the path. And that's where I think that, coupled with the be open, takes you interesting places. Before we started, like I lived here for 25 years. I'm like, I'm never leaving New York. And then I left New York. Sometimes you just have to go with it and see where it takes you.
So with that openness and reinvention, what's next? What are you thinking about these days that's next for you and or your team, your brands?
I feel that we, having started with sort of more luxury and lifestyle work, I am really interested in this smaller format, tighter format of hospitality. I was very lucky to be able to work on Citizen M coming to Marriott, and at the very same time also work on Postcard Cabins. So two brands that are so clear in their personality. And both of them are roughly 150 square feet when you look at the sleeping space, and this lovely opportunity to look at what do you really need and how do you use it and why do you use it. And one is in the woods and one is in an urban format. And, the consistency with those products are sort of rolling out, and this idea of how much do you need to be comfortable and how small is too small. And, it's sort of all of those age-old questions of like, what does that mean? And how small a space for two people? And, as we look at growth and far-flung places, or what are people sort of traveling for and what is driving them and what is novel and what does make you want to step out more, I feel like models around that sort of development, and I don't know where that takes us. That's just me being me. But I feel like, we as human beings have access to so much more today, right? We have the internet, we read, chat GPT, you name it, we have it. I mean, by this time Matt's son is grown up, God only knows how he's going to be traveling. And so what is that sort of actual push into hospitality design, and where do we evolve to? I'm so curious to see what that looks like. But still have that beautiful ability to pause and take a moment and offer refuge and escape and a little bit of that sort of reset when you need it.
What about you, Matt? For you and Workshop APD, what are you thinking about?
We spend a lot of time talking about this. I think there are sort of two answers to that. One is the internal answer and one is the external answer. The internal answer, we spend a lot of time talking about transition. We spend a lot of time talking about how we continue to mentor and grow the really strong people at our firm so that they eventually will take over. And how do we give them a seat at the table and a voice and make sure, to be honest, that we're not getting in their way. I think as a founding partner, what we've learned is that we don't know how to get out of the way, right? We don't. We think we do. We think we get out of the way, but then we realize we're right back in the weeds and stepping on everyone's toes. And so I think there's a little bit of like looking in the mirror and being sort of a little bit honest about where you can add value and where you can possibly step away. And there have been a lot of really good conversations about like, what is my value today? And is my value today in mentorship? Is my value today in ambassadorship? Is my value today in, in evangelizing what we do and things like that? Like, where does my value, my real intrinsic value lie? And that those have been sort of fun, interesting, introspective, humbling conversations, right? But it's all part of growth. It's all part of like, where are we going, right? I don't think we've ever been a firm. We've never been static. We've always been moving. And this is just another part of that movement. And I think a lot of it, I think our industry is changing a lot. The people in our industry is changing a lot. There's been a lot of change recently that has really been very destabilizing, both politically, socially, and within our industry. And I think it really makes a lot of us, to be honest, step back and go, what the fuck is going, like, I need to reevaluate. And reevaluate isn't like a wholesale thing, but it's like, how can I just see things more clearly, right? We're all, anyone working, is especially in New York, has a head down, get it done mentality. And when you pick your head up and look around, what you see is changing, and sometimes it's not always pretty, and sometimes you just have to sort of understand where you are in that space. So I think on an internal point of view, that's kind of where we are, and they've been really thoughtful, healthy discussions. On the external side, we're doing some really fun things. We launched a furniture line a couple of years ago that's been doing really well and continuing to grow. So it's fun seeing that. It's a different part of my brain. Honestly, it's taking off the service hat and putting on a vendor hat, which is really funny, because vendors are always coming to us to sell. Now I'm going to them. So you're putting yourself in a different pair of shoes. You're thinking about a different business strategy. It is really fun because it's new. We talk about geographic expansion, territorial expansion. We have done a lot of residential work, within the US. We're thinking about where do we go from here. We're starting to get work in the Bahamas, in the Caribbean. Same thing on the hospitality side. Just got off a call about a project in Mexico, which was exciting. We're doing a project in Costa Rica right now. So it's like, how do we begin to take this brand and scale it? And then, of course, what else does growth mean? What other opportunities do we have to think about where we might be able to leverage what we do into sort of other areas of value? And so those are all live conversations. It's fun now. Andrew and I were the founding partners, but now we have a whole leadership team. So it's fun to have these conversations with everyone and see what they think and where they want to take the firm, because at the end of the day, it will end up being their firm, not mine. You know what I mean? And so there's sort of an excitement to sort of see where it goes. And I think part of it gets back to where we started, which is asking the questions, not knowing the answers, and being willing to sort of go blindly down a path, knowing that you've got a really strong, infrastructure in place.
We're very curious in this podcast about self-reflection, and part of self-reflection is acknowledging something that we call what you were doing wrong, but you could look at it as something that is you had a learning, you had an experience, and you don't want to do it again, or you want to catapult and do something else. It's not meant to be, I don't know, superficial as that word means. But if you were to, put it in those terms, what is something that you are currently doing wrong, maybe repeatedly, or maybe just in a very recent instance, that, and what are you going to do to change it?
I think, something you just said, like, there's been a lot of change in the hospitality industry. And, there was a lot of change at my company, and then it sort of continued into the industry. And I think for me, it's this realization that it is okay to say when you're not okay. And when you put it out there, in doing so, you're almost showing yourself grace. But what you're also doing is perhaps opening an avenue for real conversation that helps you evolve your own thinking around, like, I thought things had to be a certain way. They're not. And maybe with the grace that I'm showing myself and the wisdom of others, I am allowing myself to expand my headspace into a new something. And, some of it is stuff I've heard before, but now I'm hearing it differently. And I think that that is interesting and that is valuable. And I think it's okay to say you're not okay. And when you can acknowledge that for yourself, I think you are also much better in terms of being able to be something for other people too. As architects, I feel like we're always so like buttoned up. I have this, I'm together. And maybe it's an age thing or whatever it is, but yeah, not always okay. And open yourself up and see what you can give, and you might be lucky enough to receive.
There's a lot of wisdom in that. How about you, Matt?
So I'm going to contextualize this. Do you know, I don't know if you've ever heard of a 360 review. Do you know
Yes.
what okay. So so my partner and I just did 360 reviews at our firm. And a 360 review, for those of you that don't know about it, is where you're not getting just, we're the owners of the firm, so there's nobody above us, right? Normally a review is done by your superiors. A 360 review is done by everyone around you, right? Everyone that reports to you, everyone that you have a relationship with. And it's done, we use this amazing person, the psychologist, who takes all the information. She interviewed, I think, about 16 people that work with me, took all their, asked them questions, what works with Matt, what doesn't work with Matt, all these questions. She then synthesizes it back into a report that she delivers. So you're not getting feedback from the person who says, I don't like when you do this. What she's doing is synthesizing it and saying, here's what I've noticed. I've noticed some trends. I've noticed this is what you do really well. This is what you don't do really well. So your question is a pertinent one because I am literally in the middle of it right now, unpacking it all. The interesting thing about getting the review is I think, I'm not going to, obviously can't speak for everybody, but for myself, none of it was new, right? I think deep in my soul, I know the things that I do well and I know the things that I don't do well. I know the things that make me feel insecure, the things, where I feel like an imposter, the things where I feel like I'm not holding myself accountable in X, Y, and Z. To have somebody else echo them back to you is a fun moment in life. It's really where you do get to sort of dig deep. And so I know that I have trust issues, right? I do. I think I have trust issues. I want things done a certain way. And because I'm in my head thinking about things in a complex, comprehensive way, and I don't necessarily trust that the people that I'm talking to are seeing the same picture that I'm seeing. So I have trust issues. I can also be skeptical, right? Now, those two things combined aren't a great way to lead, or they're not a great way when you're sending that energy out. Now, a lot of it has to do with how, this is my therapist speaking, right? But how you send that energy out. It's one thing to have trust issues. It's one thing to be skeptical. But when you use those traits in a way that creates anxiety, that's destabilizing, that creates uncertainty, obviously that's unhealthy. So if I can think about what I need to do to control those trust issues, to control that skepticism, and make sure that I can phrase those concerns that I have in a way that doesn't come across as aggressive or destabilizing or, any of those things, but done in a thoughtful and positive way and in a timely way, well, then maybe there's a win for both of us. Maybe I get to express myself in a way that makes me feel comfortable and makes my team not feel like they've been, that they're not trusted or that I'm skeptical or anything like that. So I'm working on the how. I don't totally know the answer. I think I'm learning what the tools in the toolbox are to do that. But I think at the end of the day, what I know, and this comes from the positive side of the review, all of it comes from a good place, right? It all comes from caring tremendously about the work, about having a vision for the work and having a bar set for the work that is incredibly high, holding myself to an incredibly high standard because of the environment we're in, the city we're in, the competition we have, the people we're around. Like, I never think I'm cutting it, right? I look at all the work on Instagram, on Pinterest, in magazines, my peers do, and my reaction is like, holy shit, that's awesome. Like, I need to hold myself to that standard. So part of it is like, I also need to sort of be able to step back and trust in myself that the work is that good, that everybody else wants it to be that good, that the bar is already that high, right? And sort of go into it with that energy. So it is a live question.
Yes, 360 reviews are fun and uncomfortable and amazing. So I think it says a lot about your organization that you even instituted it at all,
agree.
given the things that you struggle with. So there's some wisdom already in you, clearly, that has identified that.
I would say one thing to that, and this is something that I don't think a lot of young people understand. I try to teach it to my son all the time. I think a lot of people are afraid to be vulnerable, but I think that once you are, you realize what a strength it is. You realize that being vulnerable, and this gets back to what you were saying, like owning the fact that you aren't happy with where things are, uncomfortable or not always good, right? How are you? Good, fine, right? To be able to say, I'm not good today. Like to be able to own that actually goes from a weakness to a strength, a tremendous strength. And I think the older I get, the more I learn that. So I think the more willing I am to be vulnerable.
Yeah. So then flipping the question, if you had a fundamental question, just one question that you would want everyone within our industry to answer, what would that be? If you could ask one question to anyone and they would answer it, what would be that question?
I think it's always ask yourself why. Why do this? Why? Why do something? Always come back to the why.
We'll talk a lot in sort of group discussions about what the want is. And I think that's the same as the why. What's the want behind this? You can say, why are you acting this way? Why are you pursuing this? What's the want? Peel back the onion a little bit. And it could be a relationship thing. If your coworkers aren't getting along, if you're frustrated on a project, what's the want behind it?
And express that.
And express that. What's the talk? And get that is getting to be vulnerable. Well, I don't like the way they're talking to me. Why? What do you want out of this? What is it that you're looking for? So,
and it isn't always the negative; it's the positive too. Like, why do you love this so much? What is it that brings? It can be in celebration of too.
That's a very good point. I think we all focus way too much on kind of the negative and the losses and the criticism. We don't celebrate the wins nearly as much, and we need to.
Thanks so much, guys. Really great talking with you
very
today.
much.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
That was Aliya Khan, the Vice President of Global Design Strategy at Marriott International, and Matt Berman, a founding principal at Workshop APD, an architecture and design studio based in New York City. Aliya and Matt are currently in conversation about their next hotel project collaborations. Thanks so much for joining us. If this episode resonated with you, the best way to support the show is to share it with a friend or colleague, someone you think would appreciate this conversation as much as you do. And if you haven't already, please take a moment to rate and review Working Together on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps new listeners find the show, and it means a lot to us. Thanks for being part of the conversation, and until next time, keep building, keep questioning, and keep working together. The Working Together podcast is produced by the team at Radio Kismet, including Christopher Plant and Justin Berger. The production and editing staff also included Brick and Wonder team members Ed Thompson, Carrie Potter, and Roya Osuli. I'm Drew Lang.
And I'm Ravi Arps.
And you've been listening to the Brick and Wonder podcast.